At 68 years old, Eleanor Whitmore thought she was hosting a quiet family Christmas dinner. Instead, she discovered her daughter had secretly risked her home, her savings, and the life she built with her late husband. If you want to know what happened next, keep watching and take a moment to subscribe our channel. She pressed the blade of the kitchen knife so hard against the roast that the handle snapped in my hand. That was the moment I realized my daughter had invited 32 strangers into my home for Christmas dinner without asking me first. And that was also the moment I discovered the bank had frozen my account. The smell of burnt rosemary filled the kitchen while laughter drifted from the living room upstairs, bright and careless and young, and I remember staring down at my trembling fingers, thinking one impossible thing. How long had my own life been happening without me in it? I was 68 years old when everything collapsed. You need to understand what that meant. At 68, people assume your storms are behind you. They imagine older women live in smaller emotional worlds, tidy little routines made of gardening gloves and grocery lists and early bedtimes. They think devastation belongs to the young because young people still expect things from life. But grief changes shape with age. At 28, heartbreak feels like fire. At 68, it feels like erosion, quiet, constant. A cliff disappearing grain by grain into the sea. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and for most of my life, I believed love meant usefulness. I believed if I made enough meals, solved enough problems, absorbed enough disappointment, silently enough, then eventually the people around me would understand my value without my ever having to ask for it aloud. I was wrong. The knife handle cracked in my palm with a dry snapping sound. From upstairs, my daughter Vanessa shouted, "Mom? Are the short ribs almost done? People are starving up here." People, not guests. People, as though strangers had simply materialized in my home like weather. The kitchen smelled of garlic and wine and exhaustion. My lower back ached so badly I could feel the pulse of it behind my knees. Snow tapped softly against the windows over the sink, while the dishwasher rattled like an old train beside me. I closed my eyes. 32 guests. 48 hours earlier, she had told me it would be 6 people. 6. I opened the freezer and stared at the shelves I had emptied all week, preparing for a quiet family dinner. There were containers stacked everywhere. Potatoes, stock, desserts, pie crusts wrapped in wax paper. I had cooked for 3 days straight. And upstairs, they were drinking expensive champagne Vanessa had purchased with a credit card attached to my name. I did not know that part yet. Not fully, but the first crack had already opened. My grandson Noah wandered into the kitchen, holding his phone in one hand and a half-eaten dinner roll in the other. He was 26, exhausted looking, with his father's sad eyes and his mother's talent for pretending everything was normal. "Grandma," he said quietly, "you should sit down for a minute." "I don't have a minute." His gaze dropped to the broken knife handle, then to my hands. "You're bleeding." I looked down. A thin line of blood slid across my palm. Funny, I hadn't even felt it. He grabbed a towel quickly and wrapped it around my hand, while upstairs someone turned the music louder. Jazz? Vanessa always played jazz when she wanted people to think she came from a sophisticated family. "What exactly is this dinner?" I asked finally. Noah hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. "What aren't you telling me?" He looked toward the ceiling as though he could see through it into the living room above us. Then he said quietly, "Mom invited investors." I stared at him. "For what?" His face tightened. "For the wellness company." The room went cold. Not temperature cold, truth cold. The kind that enters through your ribs. 3 years earlier, Vanessa had started a wellness brand online selling expensive supplements and motivational courses to wealthy women terrified of aging. She called it renewal coaching. I called it selling panic in prettier packaging. She had borrowed $50,000 from me to start the company after Richard died. Richard, my husband, the ghost in every room of this story. When he died, I was 65 years old and still believed my family saw me clearly. Richard had been a literature professor with careful hands and a habit of leaving notes inside books for me to find months later. He smelled like cedar and black tea. Even after 42 years of marriage, hearing his key in the front door still made my body soften. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, a truck driver fell asleep outside Hartford and crushed the driver's side of Richard's car so completely the state trooper told me they identified him by his wedding ring. There are sounds the body never forgets. The sound I made in that hospital hallway still lives somewhere inside me. After Richard died, everyone praised Vanessa for stepping up to help me through widowhood. What they didn't see was that she had slowly stepped into every empty space in my life until I could no longer tell where grief ended and dependence began. She handled my banking, my appointments, my investments, my passwords. At first it felt loving, practical. I was grieving. She was organized. I trusted her. That distinction matters. I was not foolish. I loved her. And now 32 investors sat upstairs eating food I paid for while my bank account had apparently been frozen. I looked at Noah carefully. What wellness company? His jaw flexed. The new version. What new version? He inhaled slowly. And that was when I found out Vanessa had used my house as collateral 6 months earlier without fully explaining the paperwork she had me sign after Richard's funeral. The kitchen suddenly sounded too loud. The dishwasher, the oven fan, the music upstairs, my own breathing. What paperwork? Noah swallowed hard. She said it was for tax restructuring after Grandpa died. I leaned against the counter. No. No. What did she do? He looked physically ill saying it. She took a business loan against the house. I remember the smell first. Burned sugar, one of the pies in the oven. Then my knees gave out. Noah caught me before I hit the floor. Grandma! I could barely hear him, because suddenly I remembered every document Vanessa had placed in front of me during those numb months after Richard died. Sign here, Mom. Initial there. This protects the estate. This simplifies taxes. This helps avoid probate complications. I had trusted my daughter with the administrative debris of grief because I could barely remember to eat back then. And upstairs, she was entertaining investors in my home. While the bank froze my account. I pressed the towel against my hand and whispered the only thing I could think. How much? Noah closed his eyes. 800,000. I laughed. Actually laughed. One sharp, broken sound. Because the number was so enormous, it became unreal. $800,000. Against the house Richard built for us. Against the blue kitchen tile we picked together in 1987. Against the oak tree where Vanessa herself once buried a shoebox of treasures when she was 7 years old. Against every ordinary sacred thing a life quietly accumulates. And upstairs, my daughter was pouring champagne. What I didn't know yet was that Richard had already suspected something before he died. You need to understand what that meant before I tell you what he left behind. I finished cooking dinner. That is the part people never understand when I tell this story now. They imagine I screamed, threw plates, dragged the investors out by their designer coats. But women like me are trained differently. We survive the immediate disaster first. Then we fall apart later in private. So I finished cooking. I plated 32 dinners while my hand throbbed under fresh bandages Noah wrapped himself. I listened to Vanessa laugh upstairs in the bright performative voice she used for wealthy people. I carried trays up and down the staircase until my spine felt like shattered glass. And all night I watched. That is what older women do best when they stop talking. We watch. Vanessa moved through the dining room in a cream silk dress, introducing herself like a woman who had invented success personally. Candles flickered against crystal glasses. Expensive perfume floated through the air. Investors nodded while she spoke about female empowerment and authentic transformation and scaling global wellness communities. Authentic. That word nearly made me choke. Then she saw me standing in the doorway holding another tray. "There she is," Vanessa announced brightly. "My mom, the heart of this family." Everyone smiled politely. One woman with silver hair and intelligent eyes asked, "Did your mother help inspire the business?" Vanessa laughed lightly. "My mother believes in hard work and sacrifice." Something about the way she said sacrifice chilled me, because suddenly I understood. To Vanessa, my exhaustion was not a tragedy, it was infrastructure. I set the tray down, my arthritis burned in my fingers. And one of the investors, a younger woman, maybe 30 years old, looked directly at me for a long moment. Really looked. Noticed the bandaged hand, the exhaustion, the way Vanessa never once asked whether I needed help. That young woman became important later. Her name was Clara Bennett. Remember it, because sometimes strangers become witnesses to truths families refuse to see. Dinner stretched for hours. At one point, Vanessa tapped a spoon against her wine glass dramatically. "I just want to thank my incredible mother," she said warmly. "None of this would be possible without her support." Applause. Polite. Elegant. And suddenly I realized everyone in that room believed I had willingly funded Vanessa's empire because she had told them that story repeatedly. The supportive mother. The proud family matriarch. The widowed woman joyfully helping her daughter build a legacy. No one knew the money came from confusion and grief and documents signed through tears. No one knew my checking account had been frozen 2 days before Christmas because Vanessa's company had defaulted on payments. No one knew foreclosure letters already existed somewhere. And then Clara asked the question that changed the direction of the entire evening. "So, Eleanor," she said gently, "what did you do before retirement?" Vanessa answered before I could speak. "Oh, Mom was just a school librarian." Just? I looked at my daughter. "I spent 38 years as head archivist for Yale's Rare Manuscripts Division. I restored centuries-old texts by hand. I published research under my own name. I lectured internationally. And my daughter reduced my life to just a librarian because investors preferred simple women with casserole dishes instead of intellectual histories." I smiled. "Small. Tight." "Actually," I said softly, "I specialized in preservation." Clara's expression shifted immediately. "Preservation of what?" "Human memory." The room quieted slightly. Vanessa laughed again. "Mom always says things dramatically." But Clara kept watching me. And I have thought about this moment every single day since, because it was the first time in years someone looked at me like a complete person instead of a useful background object. After dessert, while investors toured the house admiring crown molding and antique furniture Vanessa implied belonged to her future lifestyle brand headquarters, Clara found me alone in the kitchen, rinsing dishes. "You didn't know about the loan," she said quietly. Not a question. A statement. I froze. The faucet ran steadily between us. "What makes you think that?" "My mother used to smile exactly like you when she was trapped." I looked at her then, really looked, and saw something beneath her polished professionalism. Recognition. Clara leaned against the counter. "I do due diligence investigations for investors," she said softly, "and none of Vanessa's numbers make sense." The air shifted. "She claims family assets backing her expansion," Clara continued carefully, "but legally the ownership trail is strange." My heart pounded. What kind of strange? She hesitated, then lowered her voice. The kind that makes me think someone elderly signed paperwork they didn't fully understand. Upstairs, laughter exploded loudly. But down there in the kitchen, something much quieter and more dangerous began. Truth. Clara reached into her purse slowly. I shouldn't technically do this yet, she said, but I think you need to see something before your daughter presents tomorrow morning. She handed me a folder. Inside were copies of financial documents, loan transfers, property leverage agreements, default notices, and one page highlighted in yellow, projected liquidation of primary residential asset upon Q4 failure. I stared at the sentence. Primary residential asset. My house? Vanessa wasn't protecting the house with the business. She was gambling the house on the business. What happens tomorrow? I whispered. Clara's face darkened. She asks investors for emergency capital. My mouth went dry. And if she doesn't get it? Clara looked toward the ceiling. Then the lenders take the house within 90 days? The room tilted. 90 days? After 42 years in that home? After Richard. After everything. I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself. And that was when Clara told me the one thing I still struggle to forgive. Your daughter listed you in internal documents as mentally diminished due to grief. Silence. Pure silence. Even the dishwasher had stopped. I could hear ice cracking faintly in glasses upstairs. Mentally diminished. So investors would not question the signatures. I remember touching the edge of the counter because suddenly I needed proof something solid still existed in the world. Clara's voice softened. I don't think she's evil. Neither did I. That was the problem. Vanessa had not become a monster. She had become ambitious slowly enough to mistake exploitation for entitlement. There is a difference, and that difference destroys families more quietly. What do I do? I asked. Clara looked at me sadly. You tell the truth before she buries you under her version of it. But the truth was bigger than even Clara knew, because later that night, after the investors finally left and Vanessa stumbled upstairs half-drunk and triumphant, Noah handed me a small brass key. Grandpa wanted you to have this if anything ever felt wrong, he said. I stared at the key in my palm. Richard's handwriting was attached to it. For Eleanor, when you are ready to see clearly. My entire body went cold, because dead men do not leave warnings unless they already know the storm is coming. The attic smelled like dust and cedar and old winters. I climbed the narrow staircase at 2 a.m. wearing Richard's wool cardigan over my nightgown because the house suddenly felt unfamiliar to me. Noah followed behind, carrying a flashlight. The brass key fit a small wooden trunk tucked beneath old holiday decorations. My fingers shook opening it. Inside were journals, bank statements, letters, and one sealed envelope with my name written in Richard's careful slanted script. Eleanor, if you were reading this, then I was right to worry. I sat down hard on the attic floor. The flashlight trembled slightly in Noah's hand while snow whispered against the roof above us. Richard's letter smelled faintly like his study, paper and tobacco and ink. I began reading. Vanessa came to me 6 months ago asking for money, a great deal of money. She said her business was growing faster than expected and she needed short-term leverage. When I asked for financial statements, she became defensive. That frightened me. I stopped breathing. Richard continued, I hired an independent accountant quietly because I feared she was drowning and too ashamed to admit it. Eleanor, the business is failing, badly. She has been inflating revenue projections and using new investments to cover existing debt. My vision blurred. The letter shook in my hands. I wanted to tell you immediately, but your mother was dying then, and you already looked exhausted from grief before grief had even officially arrived. I convinced myself I had more time to fix this carefully. But there was more. If something happens to me before I resolve it, you must know this. Vanessa loves you. I believe that completely. But she also believes she deserves rescue at any cost. That combination is dangerous. I closed my eyes. If you like this story, hit like button and share this story with someone who may like this, because only Richard could describe a person so accurately while still loving them. Noah sat beside me silently. I kept reading. There are copies of every financial concern in this trunk. Clara Bennett's father assisted me with some of the investigative work before he retired. If you need help, find Clara. She is honest. I looked up sharply. Clara, not coincidence. Connection? Richard had already built a bridge toward the truth before he died. The final paragraph nearly destroyed me. You spent your entire life preserving fragile things, Eleanor. Ancient texts, dying languages, broken pages everyone else overlooked. Please remember you deserve preservation too. I covered my mouth and cried for the first time since Richard's funeral. Not polite tears, not controlled widow tears, animal grief, because suddenly I understood something unbearable. Richard knew, not everything, but enough to leave breadcrumbs toward survival. Noah wrapped his arm around my shoulders carefully while the attic creaked softly around us. She told people you were confused after Grandpa died, he whispered. I nodded slowly. I know. She said you wanted her to handle everything. I looked at him then. My God. What? She probably believes that. That was the horrifying part. Vanessa had rewritten reality so thoroughly she no longer saw manipulation. Only necessity, only pressure, only the next emergency requiring sacrifice from someone else. And underneath all of it was something even older. Fear. The next morning, she stood in my kitchen drinking green juice while scrolling through investor emails on her phone. Sunlight poured through the windows onto the blue tiles Richard and I chose decades earlier. I watched my daughter carefully. She looked tired, beautiful, fragile around the eyes. Not evil. That would have been easier. You should wear the pearl earrings today, she said absently. Investors trust women who look maternal. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked quietly, how bad is the debt? Her thumb stopped moving. Slowly, she lowered the phone. What? The debt, Vanessa? Silence. Then she smiled too quickly. I don't know what you mean. I placed Richard's letter on the counter between us. Everything changed in her face. Everything. Fear arrived first, then calculation, then anger. You went through Dad's private things? Did you use this house as collateral? Mom, did you? Her jaw tightened. You signed the documents. I trusted you. You always trusted Dad with financial things too. The cruelty of that sentence stunned even her after it left her mouth. We both heard it hanging there, sharp, ugly. She looked away first. I was trying to save the company. By risking my home? Our home. No, that word mattered. No, I said quietly. It stopped being your home the moment you gambled it without telling me. She slammed the phone onto the counter. You have no idea how hard I've worked. I stared at her. And you have no idea how hard I've worked my entire life because you never bothered asking. Her eyes flashed. This again? You always do this intellectual martyr thing whenever anyone challenges you. Intellectual martyr thing. I remembered staying awake nights, cataloging manuscripts while she slept safely upstairs as a child. I remembered sewing Halloween costumes after 14-hour workdays. I remembered paying for ballet lessons and orthodontics and summer camps. And suddenly I saw the terrible truth. Vanessa did not see sacrifice because sacrifice had always arrived invisibly for her. Like electricity, like plumbing, useful things hidden behind walls. What happens if investors refuse more money? I asked. She looked away. That won't happen. What happens? Her silence answered. I nodded slowly. You were going to let them take the house? No, but you risked it. Tears sprang suddenly into her eyes. I was going to fix it. When? I just needed more time. There it was, the religion of desperate people. More time, more money, one more rescue, one more chance. And then she said the sentence that split my heart cleanly in half. I thought you would understand because you're my mother. Not because I deserved honesty, not because she respected me. Because motherhood, to her, meant permanent access to sacrifice. I looked at my daughter for a very long time. Then I said quietly, I think you confused love with permission. She stared at me. And this is where everything changes. Because that afternoon I attended Vanessa's investor presentation, not as support, as witness. The conference room smelled like coffee and expensive perfume. Snow melted off boots near the entrance, while investors arranged laptops and spreadsheets beneath warm, recessed lighting. Vanessa stood at the front, radiant in cream silk again, speaking confidently about expansion projections and strategic recovery pathways. Recovery. Interesting word for collapse. Clara sat near the back, watching me carefully. Noah beside me looked like he might be sick. And halfway through Vanessa's presentation, an older man raised his hand. Can you clarify the residential asset exposure? Vanessa hesitated. Just 1 second. But I saw it. Fear. Then she smiled smoothly. My mother's property remains fully protected. Lie. Clean. Elegant. Immediate. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. 30 people turned toward me. Vanessa froze, and suddenly I felt strangely calm. After all those years preserving ancient documents, decoding faded truths buried beneath centuries of damage, I finally understood something. Truth survives longer than performance. My home is not protected, I said quietly. Silence? Vanessa whispered sharply, Mom, sit down. No. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Clara lowered her eyes. The older man frowned. I continued, My daughter leveraged my home without fully explaining the risk after my husband died. Vanessa's face drained completely. That's not fair. I signed documents during grief I did not understand because I trusted my daughter. One investor closed her laptop slowly. Another exchanged glances with Clara. Vanessa stepped toward me desperately. You don't understand business structures. I almost pitied her then, because she still thought intelligence belonged only to modern people with pitch decks and branding language. I understand archives, I said calmly, and fraud depends heavily on altered narratives. The room went completely still. Vanessa's breathing became visible. Fast. Panicked. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. That sentence nearly broke me, because I believed her. You need to understand that. I believed her completely, which somehow hurt worse. I looked at the investors. My daughter is not a monster, I said softly. She is a frightened person who mistook desperation for entitlement and ambition for immunity. Vanessa started crying, real crying, not performance. I was trying to build something, and you did, I said gently. You built it on top of me. No one spoke. Snow fell steadily outside enormous glass windows. And then Clara stood up. There are ethical pathways forward, she said carefully, but only if financial disclosures become honest immediately. That was the turning point. Not humiliation, not punishment, truth. Clean and public and undeniable. The meeting ended within an hour. Most investors withdrew quietly. A few stayed behind, speaking softly with attorneys. Vanessa sat alone afterward, staring at her hands. I approached slowly. She looked smaller somehow, like the ambitious woman had collapsed inward, revealing the frightened child underneath. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. There it was, the real confession. Not greed. Momentum, the terrible machine of expectation once it begins feeding itself. I sat beside her carefully. "What happened to you?" I asked softly. She laughed bitterly through tears. "You really don't know?" "No." Her eyes lifted to mine. "I spent my entire childhood watching you be brilliant and exhausted." The room went silent around us. "You were always working," she whispered. "Always helping everyone. Always needed by everyone. And Dad worshipped your mind." I stared at her. I thought if I became extraordinary enough, people would need me too. My chest tightened painfully. "But somewhere along the way," she said, voice cracking, "I stopped caring whether they loved me honestly. I just needed them impressed." There it was, the inheritance I never meant to give her. A life built around usefulness. Just wearing different clothes. I reached for her hand slowly. She flinched first, then let me hold it. "I should have seen you sooner," I whispered. She cried harder after that. Not because she was forgiven, because finally she was understood. The legal aftermath lasted nearly a year. There were hearings, debt negotiations, asset restructuring, long meetings in cold offices smelling faintly of printer toner and stale coffee. I sold the house voluntarily before foreclosure could touch it. That decision shocked everyone. But I could not bear the idea of strangers eventually forcing us out of rooms Richard painted himself. So I chose the ending myself. There is power in choosing. Even grief changes shape when chosen. Packing the house nearly destroyed me. Every object held memory. Richard's scarves still hanging beside the door. Vanessa's childhood height marks inside the pantry. The chipped ceramic bowl Noah made in 3rd grade. 42 years of ordinary life folded into cardboard boxes. One afternoon, I found an old cassette tape labeled Eleanor Lecture 1989 in Richard's handwriting. I played it alone while wrapping dishes. My younger voice filled the empty kitchen discussing preservation theory passionately to a university audience. Clear, confident, alive. I sat on the floor afterward and wept quietly because I had forgotten that woman existed. The witness to all this, strangely enough, became Clara. She visited often during the legal negotiations, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes simply sitting beside me in silence while paperwork spread across the dining room table. One rainy afternoon, she admitted something. "My mother lost everything to my father's business debts when I was 14. I looked up. He hid it for years," she said. "She kept saying she trusted him because she loved him. People acted like she was stupid afterward." That familiar anger rose inside me. She wasn't stupid. "No," Clara agreed softly. "She was loyal." Loyalty. Another beautiful thing capable of ruining women completely. Months passed. Vanessa entered therapy voluntarily after the investors filed civil complaints. She sold the company eventually, not because courts forced her, because she finally admitted she no longer recognized herself inside it. Noah moved to Boston for graduate school. And me? I rented a small cottage near the Connecticut shoreline where salt air drifted through open windows at night and gulls screamed over gray water every morning. Smaller house, smaller life, but mine, entirely mine. And then one impossible thing happened. Yale invited me back. Apparently, my lectures from the 80s had quietly become influential in preservation studies. Younger archivists cited my work regularly. A department chair discovered I was retired and called personally asking whether I would consider teaching one seminar. One seminar became 3. 3 became a visiting fellowship. At 70 years old, I walked back into academic halls carrying leather satchels and smelling dust and books and winter again. Students listened when I spoke, really listened. One afternoon after class, a young woman lingered nervously beside my desk. "You talk about preservation like it's emotional," she said. "It is emotional. But you mean more than documents?" I smiled slowly. "Yes." She hesitated. "How do you preserve yourself after betrayal?" The room went quiet. I thought about Richard, about Vanessa, about the blue kitchen tiles, about signatures made through grief. Then I answered honestly, "You stop handing your life to people who only know how to consume it." She wrote that down carefully. And I realized then something profound. Pain transformed becomes wisdom. Not automatically, not romantically, but deliberately, like restoration work. Patient, precise, layer by layer. A year after the investor collapse, Vanessa came to visit the cottage. Rain tapped softly against the windows while tea steeped between us untouched. She looked older, not physically. Spiritually, humility ages people differently than stress. "I got a job," she said quietly. "Oh?" "At a nonprofit women's recovery center. I waited. They help women rebuild financially after domestic abuse or coercive debt situations." "Interesting." She smiled sadly. "Turns out I'm weirdly qualified to recognize manipulation." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she whispered, "I still don't know if you should forgive me." I looked out toward the ocean. "I don't think forgiveness is the right word." "What is?" "Recognition." She frowned slightly. I continued softly, "I recognize your damage now. That doesn't erase mine." Tears filled her eyes immediately. "But recognition is where honest love begins." That sentence changed something between us. Not repair, not restoration. Something quieter, more realistic. Two women finally seeing each other without mythology. Richard remained the ghost beneath everything. Sometimes I still reached for him in sleep. Sometimes I still found notes hidden in old books. Once, inside a gardening encyclopedia, I found a scrap of paper that simply read, "You make ordinary life feel intelligent." I carried that note in my wallet for months, because after everything, that was still the truest thing anyone had ever said about me. And this is where people expect the dramatic ending, the revenge, the perfect reconciliation, the complete destruction. But life after betrayal rarely arrives theatrically. Mostly it arrives quietly, in boundaries, in smaller rooms, in different choices repeated consistently. 3 winters later, Vanessa and I developed a strange new ritual. Every Sunday morning, she visited the cottage and we walked the shoreline together without discussing business or debt or the past, unless it arrived naturally. Some days we spoke about books, some days about Noah, some days about nothing at all. And slowly I realized something surprising. Trust rebuilt itself less like architecture and more like gardening. Tiny things, repeated carefully. One afternoon, she stopped beside the water suddenly. "I used to think your life was small," she admitted. "The wind carried salt against our faces. And now?" She looked toward the horizon. "I think it was deep." I have thought about that sentence every single day since, because depth and visibility are not the same thing. Women like me often disappear publicly while becoming immense privately. No applause, no branding, no investors. Just decades of carrying emotional worlds other people mistake for ordinary. The final piece of this story belongs to Noah, the witness generation, the bridge forward. At his graduate school graduation, he introduced me to his girlfriend by saying, "This is my grandmother Eleanor. She taught me that love without respect becomes extraction eventually." Vanessa heard him say it. So did I. And neither of us corrected him. Last autumn, I planted lavender outside the cottage. The soil smelled rich and cold beneath my fingernails, while gulls wheeled overhead and distant fog curled over the water. Vanessa arrived, carrying tea in a thermos. Noah called from Boston halfway through planting, asking whether I still had Grandpa's annotated Shakespeare collection. Ordinary things, small things, but they felt different now. Chosen, intentional. Mine. That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in Richard's old cardigan, watching dusk settle over the ocean. The house creaked softly around me. The kettle whistled inside, and for the first time in many years, silence no longer felt like erasure. It felt like peace. There is a truth I know now that I did not understand when this story began. Some women spend their whole lives preserving everyone around them so carefully that they accidentally vanish from their own existence. And sometimes survival begins not with leaving your family behind, but with finally stepping fully into view inside your own life. If this story found you today, may you remember that being needed is not the same thing as being loved. We will be here next week. Another story, another woman, another life quietly unbroken.